It was one of those winter evenings when the city felt heavier than usual. Clouds hung low, the air bit at the skin, and the streets were wet from a day of relentless drizzle. The small ATM booth at the corner of Maple and Fifth glowed faintly under a flickering streetlight. A thin queue of weary faces shuffled forward, each person hoping to get their cash quickly and retreat to wharf. Among them stood a young woman named Emily Parker, clutching her thin coat tighter around her. She wasn't rich, far from it. She worked double shifts at a small diner and still lived paycheck to paycheck, but she carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind that life's hardships couldn't erode. That's when she noticed him. A tall man with disheveled hair and a face carved by exhaustion. His clothes were soaked, his shoes muddy, and his eyes seemed hollow, as if the weight of a lifetime had collapsed on him in just one day. He hesitated behind the line, scanning the people in front of him with a restless urgency. Then, his eyes met Emily's, and something unspoken passed between them, not pity, not judgment, but something more fragile. Without thinking, Emily stepped aside, gesturing for him to go ahead. "You look like you could use it more than I can," she murmured softly. The man didn't say a word, only nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before stepping forward. "If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that even the smallest good deed can change a life, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Stories Collection. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive." Emily couldn't know, that the man standing before her had once been worth millions. His name was Daniel Hayes, a name once whispered in corporate boardrooms, printed in glossy magazines, and spoken in awe at investor galas. He had built a tech empire from nothing, rising from a cramped apartment to penthouse offices in less than a decade. But life has a way of humbling even the strongest. In a single, catastrophic week, Daniel's world crumbled. A betrayal by his most trusted business partner wiped out his accounts. False allegations destroyed his public reputation. The media devoured the scandal, leaving nothing of the Daniel Hayes the world once admired. Today, he wasn't a millionaire. Today, he was a man with no home, no money, and no one left to call. The ATM wasn't for withdrawing wealth, it was to check if the last $43 in his account was still there, enough to buy a cheap meal and maybe a motel bed for the night. The rain had seeped into his bones, but the kindness of a stranger, one simple act of letting him cut the line, was the first warmth he'd felt in days. Emily didn't linger after withdrawing her cash. She had to buy groceries before heading home to her tiny apartment, where her younger brother, Liam, waited. He was only 16 and still recovering from a severe illness that had drained whatever little savings Emily once had. They lived on the edge, balancing bills, medical expenses, and rent like a tightrope act over a pit. Still, she never let the struggle harden her heart. She believed in giving what she could, even if it was just a smile or a moment of understanding to someone who needed it. Daniel watched her leave, disappearing into the dim street, her worn boots splashing through puddles. Something about her lingered in his mind, the way she didn't ask for anything in return, the way she didn't even seem to expect a thank you. It stirred something in him, a reminder of who he once was before greed, ambition, and betrayal had twisted his world. The next morning, Daniel sat on a park bench with a cup of cheap coffee, wondering how he would survive the week. He had considered leaving the city entirely, disappearing into some remote place where no one knew his name. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Across the street, he saw her again, Emily, struggling to carry two heavy grocery bags. One ripped open, sending apples rolling across the wet sidewalk. Without thinking, Daniel rushed over, kneeling to pick them up. Emily recognized him instantly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. They spoke for the first time that day. She learned he was going through a rough patch and had no family nearby. He learned she was caring for her brother alone, working every waking hour to keep a roof over their heads. There was no pity in their exchange, only an unspoken acknowledgement of shared hardship. Daniel offered to walk her home, and though she hesitated, she agreed. Along the way, they talked about small things, the weather, the best coffee shops, how the city looked different at night. For Daniel, it was the first conversation in months that didn't revolve around loss or scandal. For Emily, it was rare to meet someone who listened without rushing to offer empty advice. Over the following weeks, they kept crossing paths. Sometimes by chance, sometimes because Daniel found himself walking the same streets she did. He began helping her with groceries, fixing the loose hinge on her apartment door, even repairing her brother's old laptop so he could continue his schoolwork. Emily didn't know who Daniel really was. To her, he was just a kind but mysterious man who seemed far too intelligent and well-spoken to be living on the streets. She never asked for details, respecting his privacy. But Daniel knew he couldn't hide forever. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the city lights, he told her the truth. He spoke of his rise to success, the betrayal, the lies that stripped him of everything, and how he had been living with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on his back. Emily didn't recoil, didn't look at him differently. She simply said, "You're still here. That means you're stronger than they were." Those words cut deeper than she could have imagined. Emily's belief in him lit a spark Daniel thought was gone. He began taking small steps toward rebuilding his life. Not the life of luxury and boardrooms, but something more meaningful. With the last of his connections, he found work as a consultant for a small startup. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get him into a modest apartment and start fresh. Months later, Daniel stood outside Emily's building, holding a set of keys, not for himself, but for her. He had quietly saved and invested what little he earned, and with the help of a trusted friend, had arranged to pay off her rent for the next year and cover Liam's medical treatments. Emily was stunned, tears welling in her eyes. She had helped him with nothing more than a place in line, and he had returned that kindness tenfold. When he handed her the envelope, he simply said, "You gave me a reason to believe in people again. This is just me returning the favor." If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness can come back to you in ways you never expect, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your support helps spread these stories to more people who might just need a little hope today. Special request before we end. Drop a comment telling us about the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you. Your story might inspire someone else to keep believing in goodness. She let a man cut in line at the ATM, not knowing he'd just lost everything and was actually a millionaire in disguise. The night the story began was not extraordinary in the way most people expect miracles to happen. No streaks of lightning illuminating the sky in grand spectacle, no soundtrack. of triumphant music echoing from somewhere beyond the clouds. It was an ordinary Tuesday in the middle of a long winter, when the streets were damp and cold, the wind smelled faintly of rain, and people moved quickly from one place to another without looking up from their phones. Emily Parker stood in the short ATM line at the corner of Maple and Fifth, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. The old street lamp above the machine buzzed and flickered, casting brief, uneven halos of light over the wet pavement. She was tired, her feet sore from a 12-hour shift at the diner, but there was no choice. Her brother needed medicine in the morning, and the pharmacy only took cash. Behind her, someone stepped into the queue, and she felt the subtle presence before she saw him. Tall, lean, clothes wrinkled and damp, hair hanging in loose strands around a face that seemed older than it should have been. His eyes were the kind you didn't just look at, you felt them. Not because they were intimidating, but because they were carrying something heavy, something invisible but real. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the ATM as if time itself were about to run out. Without a second thought, Emily stepped aside and nodded toward the space in front of her. "Go ahead," she said softly. "You look like you're in a hurry." He hesitated. People like him always did. Those used to rejection rarely accept kindness without suspicion. But then, with a small nod, he moved ahead. He didn't thank her. Not because he was rude, but because sometimes words just aren't enough, and saying them would make the lump in your throat too obvious. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet power of helping someone without expecting anything in return, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Stories Collection. Your support makes it possible to keep sharing these moments that remind us of the good still left in the world. The man's name was Daniel Hayes. Once, that name had weight, spoken in meetings by powerful executives, printed on glossy magazine covers, accompanied by phrases like self-made and visionary. Daniel had started with nothing but an idea and a borrowed laptop. He had built a tech empire before the age of 35, employing hundreds, expanding globally, living in penthouses overlooking city skylines. But nothing in life is immune to collapse. In 1 week, Daniel lost everything. A partner he trusted more than a brother siphoned company funds into offshore accounts. Investors panicked, lawsuits piled up, and the media turned his name into a spectacle. The headlines didn't just report, they crucified. Overnight, he became the villain in a story he hadn't written. Bank accounts were frozen, assets seized, friends vanished, his phone stopped ringing, and so, here he was, standing in an ATM line with a stranger's small kindness as the first warmth he'd felt in weeks. He didn't know how much longer he could stay in the city. He had $43 left, enough for a day or two of food and maybe a bed at a cheap motel. The rain soaked through his coat, but at least for tonight, he wouldn't be sleeping under an overpass. Emily didn't linger to watch him. She withdrew her own meager amount and walked toward the small grocery store 2 blocks away. Her life wasn't a fairy tale either. At 27, she had already learned the art of survival, working double shifts to pay rent, skipping meals to stretch the grocery budget, and caring for her younger brother Liam since their parents passed in an accident 5 years ago. Liam's health had never been strong, and a recent diagnosis had only made things harder. But Emily refused to let him see her break. That night, Daniel sat in a nearly empty diner nursing a cheap cup of coffee. The door jingled, and he saw her again, Emily, carrying a grocery bag and shaking the rain from her coat before sliding into a booth. He thought about walking over to thank her for earlier but decided against it. People like her didn't do good things for recognition, they did them because it was who they were. Fate, however, has a strange sense of humor. The next day, as Emily left the pharmacy with a small paper bag of medicine, one of her grocery bags split open on the sidewalk, sending apples and bread rolling into the street. Daniel, passing by, knelt to help her gather them. This time, she smiled in recognition. They spoke for the first time, briefly, cautiously. He told her he was between jobs and figuring things out. She didn't pry. She told him about Liam, about the diner, about how the city felt colder in winter but more honest somehow. He offered to walk her home, and she agreed. Over the weeks that followed, they saw more of each other. Sometimes by chance, sometimes because Daniel found himself walking the same streets she did. He fixed the hinge on her apartment door, replaced a leaking faucet, and repaired Liam's old laptop so he could keep up with his schoolwork. Emily began to notice the way Daniel spoke, precise, deliberate, like someone who once had influence. She wondered about his story but respected his silence. The truth finally came out one evening as they sat in the park, the skyline glittering behind them. Daniel told her everything, the rise, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and the slow, painful descent into invisibility. When he finished, Emily didn't flinch. "You're still here," she said simply. "That means you're stronger than they were." Those words lodged deep inside Daniel. With her belief in him, he began to rebuild, not for wealth or status, but for purpose. He reached out to a few remaining contacts and found consulting work with a small startup. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a modest apartment and slowly climb out of the hole. Months later, Daniel knocked on Emily's door. In his hand was an envelope containing a prepaid lease for her apartment for the next year, along with a letter confirming Liam's treatments would be covered. Emily's hands trembled as she read it. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Daniel said, "you gave me a reason to believe people like you still exist. And because when I had nothing, you still saw me. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness never truly disappears, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Every bit of support helps spread hope to someone who might need it today." Special request before we end. Tell us in the comments about the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you. Your words might just inspire someone else to believe in goodness again.